Hello, so in this tutorial what we're going to go over is working with groups. So to get started, I'm going to just close out of this getting starting module or just create a new one. So let's make this a little bit bigger for now. And I'm just going to click on new module and let's call it groups tutorial. All right, excellent. Let's create that, open it up. All right, now we've got our new module. To create a group, we first need a set of components to actually work with. So what we're going to do is create a component, and let's just call this a player. Nothing fancy. All right, so let's say that the player has both an idle state and a rotating state. We're just going to make a simple cube and we'll call this our player. He's either going to be idle or he can be rotating. Alright, so now we've got our basic player component and we have two components for each state that he might be in. So this is where we actually get to create a group. So I'm going to create a group and let's call this idle player. And let's create another group and call him, rename, rotating player. Alright, so this is where the require section comes into play. So groups basically filter a set of entities that match a certain set of components, or you can even do expression filtering, but we'll go into that later. For now, let's just stick with the require. So for this, it's all we need. So for the idle player, we want to require, and let's choose, let's see here, player and idle. So what this means is for every entity that has both the idle and player components attached to them, it's going to belong to this group. Now this comes very in handy when dealing with various different types of states. So let's do the same thing for rotating player. We'll go ahead and choose player. We'll choose rotating. Alright, so now let's create a system. So let's call this the player system. And now let's double click on this. And what we're going to do is make it so that whenever they click on this hypothetical cube, it'll actually change its state based on what the state currently is. So what we can do for this is let's create a new dispatcher, and we're actually going to use the mouse down because it's going to be a collider and not the GUI system. So in this case, we'll use the mouse down. Alright, so, and we'll call this idle player mouse down. So in our groups tutorial, we'll choose idle player. So this is kind of the power of groups, is that we can define that only when an entity is an idle player do we want to execute this handler. So now we've got that. Let's go ahead and add another one for mouse down. Choose rotating player. So we'll say rotating player mouse down. What this also means is that effectively, since we have two components for two different states, both of these components could technically live on the same game object. So this player could be a part of both groups. Uh, this can be very helpful in a lot of situations, but if it's not the desired result, you'll want to make sure that when moving from one group to the other, you remove the component from one state and put them in the other state. So that's what we're going to do here. Whenever the idle player clicks, let's go ahead and select destroy component. We can just click right here, and we want to choose the idle. So this means that the idle component is going to be destroyed. So the key thing here is that source, since we're using a group, we have access to both the idle component and the player component. All right, so moving forward, what we need to do now is, let's say, hey, now we want to move into the rotating state. So let's go ahead and create add component. And we need to select the game object. So I'm just going to go to the same entity that belongs here. So let's choose game object. And let's choose the component we want to add. We want to add the rotating component. All right, that's all there is to this state. And we're going to do the same thing for this one. So I'm just going to do that really fast. All right, looks good now. So let's go ahead and save and compile this. All right, so now let's go ahead and remove this canvas. We don't need it anymore. We'll keep the kernel, and we went over setting up the kernel in the creating components tutorial, which is the second one in the list of tutorials. So if you missed that, yeah, you'll definitely want to go back and learn how to create the kernel. It's pretty simple. And let's go create a cube. All right, and now we want this cube to be visible. Let's make it visible. So I guess reset position here. Get him in the center of the screen. All right, and he's got his box collider. Okay, we're good. We got our cube. Now let's go ahead and collapse these. We don't need them in the way. And let's add the player component. So there's our player, and let's go ahead and add the idle, because we want him to initially start in the idle state. So at the time of this recording, it's a little bit hard to determine when using a group what dispatcher should and shouldn't be used. So it doesn't directly show that there is a need for a mouse down dispatcher. This is on our to-do list to fix, so it may already be there at the time of watching. If it is, just go ahead and click the button. Otherwise, I'm just going to add it manually by doing the mouse down dispatcher. This will ensure that our events are properly invoked. Alright, so now when we hit run, you'll see he's in the idle state, and when I click on him, you'll see that it immediately removed the component and added rotating. So I can click on it again, and I keep going back and forth into these states. So it is properly matching them based on the components that are there. So if I remove these components, if I remove the idle, notice he will no longer do anything whenever he's clicked on, because he no longer matches that group of where the player and the idle both exist. So if we go ahead and add this back idle, you'll see that it continues to work again. So this is a very dynamic system. You can work with this way of doing things to benefit you in a lot of different ways. So one thing that can also be noted from all of this is that there's a lot of different ways to do things, and one of those things is there's a handy two methods. Now these aren't a part of the event list. It's more of a right click because it's a specific type of handler, um, where the the component created handler, excuse me, is a special handler for dealing when a component is created or whenever a item matches a new group. So I can use both uh, components and groups for this component created. So this will signal us whenever something enters this new idle or rotating state. So I want to say whenever something becomes a rotating player. So I'm going to make this a little bit more descriptive. So I'm going to say on new rotating player. And we can also do the same thing with whenever it's destroyed. So this could effectively work as a whenever it's leaving a certain state. So if he's in the rotating player state, let's rename this guy to on leave rotating. Actually, let's rename both of these to on enter rotating and on leave rotating. Those make more sense. So let's go ahead and add two little log messages in here just so you can see these events invoke. So let's do log message. And we're going to just create an actual string variable. And at the time of this recording, this doesn't expand for large strings, but that's also on our to-do list to make this a little bit more easier. So let's just go ahead and go with it. We'll just say left. Let's call it exit. All right. And we'll do the same thing here and just go ahead and create a log message. And let's create another string here and call this enter. There we go, save and compile. All right, so let's run it one more time. So now whenever we clicked on it, we got the enter message. And then when we clicked it again and it left and went back into the idle state, we got the exit. So this component created and component destroyed is a very, very useful handler to use in a lot of different situations.